This video is going to cover a quality comparison between RAW and JPEG images. Most of us are aware that when cameras record images on a sensor, the data is all what we call raw data. It's electronic information. There really aren't any pixels in that at all. When you do that and you look at the back of your camera and you actually see an image, that's an interpretation of the raw data into a JPEG so that you can see what you've taken. It also is the image upon which the histogram in your camera is based. And so if you were to set the histogram's style to be high contrast and heavily saturated and vibrant, you would be getting a rather artificial appearance on that JPEG, and you would get a histogram which would not match the raw capture at all. So if you are taking the raw capture to your memory card and going to use it for processing later, it's very important that the JPEG style in your camera is set to be neutral, standard, not highly enhanced. So we're going to take a look at two images. One is captured in RAW and one is captured in JPEG. And we're going to compare what happens to them when we make a few adjustments, both in Adobe Camera Raw, and what happens if we make an adjustment in the editor mode. So if you will go to File, Open, and I have given you a folder. We can come back to the one for today. I've given you a folder called Comparing JPEG to RAW. If you open that, I have another folder called Sherry's Images. These are my friend Sherry St. Pierre, who gave me some that I could use. And in it you'll see a PDF file comparing RAW to JPEG. What I'm going to do in this video will follow along on what is in that PDF file. So we have two images, and the DNG file, that's a digital negative format. It's a neutral one which can be opened by all software. And so we're going to first start by opening that DNG file, and it will open in Adobe Camera Raw because it's a RAW file. And if you look, everything is the way it was captured. Up here along the side, the white balance is as shot, and all of the exposure settings are at 0, and the extra settings at the bottom are all to 0. So this image is how it looked coming out of her camera. And we're going to look at the JPEG. And it's quite clear that it's rather dark. Well, that's not surprising. There's a lot of dark areas that we wouldn't want bright. But there also isn't any data going all the way to the end. And we know that the area near the end here is very important. The lighter pixels that are available to your camera will have a lot more data than all the dark ones backed up here at the end. So in order to bring that brighter, we're simply going to take the white slider, which will pick up these pixels and drag them over toward the end. So with the white slider and your Option or Alt key down, you will see a black screen, and I'll start dragging. And when you start to see little bits of white appear on your screen, you've gone far enough, so lift your hands. And what you've done is simply brightened that image, very little, but you have brightened it. And if we go and look at the before and after of the image, and most of our software at the bottom right corner of the Adobe Camera Raw image, there are some icons. And the second one, when I point to it, it tells me swap before-after settings. In the oldest versions that people might have, you might see a preview button at the top, which is checked. You would uncheck preview, but I'm going to switch to before and after. And there's the before image with its histogram, and here's the after image with its histogram. Now there could be a lot more we might do to this, but we want to make it a very simple comparison. That's all I'm going to do. I'm now going to click Open Image, and it will take this image and assign pixel values to the raw data and we'll get a picture for it. We are now going to go back to the File Open command, and we're going to open the JPEG file version. And before we open it, let's check to make sure that the format for that image is set to JPEG. Sometimes when these images have been used for demonstration purposes, they're very smart and they remember what we did before. All I want to do is open it as if it is a JPEG. So if you will check with me to be sure that the format is listed as JPEG, then click Open. And this image will now open in the normal editor, and I want to look at its histogram. So I'm going to pop the histogram open, and whenever I see the yellow triangle, I just click it to get the data. Okay, it's going to be viewed very similar to the raw file, and because we want to bring the pixels closer to the right edge, in the editor mode, we use an adjustment layer called Levels. And if you go to the top of the Layers panel, or if you're in full Photoshop, go to the bottom of the Layers panel, you'll find a round bicolor circle. And if you click it, it gives you the doorway to adjustment layers. Look for the one that's called Levels and click it to open. We are going to bring those pixels over to the right side of the histogram. And when you were in Adobe Camera Raw, you dragged it over. Here we do just the reverse. We take the white point and we're going to bring it back until it begins to contact the pixels. So once again, you hold the Alt or Option key and you grab it. You'll see your black image. And this time you're dragging it back till you see the same little white dots in the middle that you saw before. And you're going to say to that, that's completed. You can X out the Levels adjustment layer. You'll notice the work you just did is on a separate layer from the background. And that's very important when we work in the editor workspace. And I want you to notice that here's your histogram that you did. And you'll notice there's something that's happened to that histogram. It suddenly has a little white lines. It makes it look a little like a picket fence. And that's because when you have pixels already, as you do in a JPEG, and you make adjustments, the only way it can change is by discarding information. And the more you work on this file in the editor, the more information will be discarded and you will weaken the histogram. So if you will go over, and I'm going to actually tab these so that they all are visible. Go over to the DNG version of it here and look at the histogram, and you will notice that the histogram is solid. That means that you were able to open the raw file and recognize it needed to have its exposure changed a bit. You corrected the exposure and then opened it here. And remember, the first time there were any pixels in that file was when you opened it in the editor. While it's in Adobe Camera Raw, it's still electronic information directly taken from the camera's sensor. So I want you to see that if you take a raw file, and this is very little work we did, but if you do anything on that while you're in Adobe Camera Raw, those corrections are made on the raw data, and therefore when you open it and use that image and it gets its pixels, you will have a beautiful, solid, complete histogram. We're going to go and look at the same image, the JPEG version, and if you look at that, how much data was discarded just in one tiny bit of adjustment. And if we were to do more adjustments, we would keep degrading the histogram. So the lesson here is, if your camera allows you to save the raw data directly to your memory card, and you develop it in Adobe Camera Raw, which is we've been learning to do, you will have a far higher quality eventual image. And of course, the JPEG, if you were to use it right from the camera and not adjust it, you wouldn't have degraded it that much. But usually we do some post-processing on images. And if you do any on a JPEG file, you degrade the quality of that image. So once again, Here is the histogram for the JPEG adjustment, and here's the histogram for the RAW adjustment. Worth thinking about. And I always tell people, if you've always taken JPEG your whole life, if you simply take your images into Camera Raw, whether they're JPEG or RAW, the same tools are there for you to use. But if you start with the RAW file, you'll end up with a better quality image.